Okay, welcome again, everyone, and thank you for taking your time this afternoon to join us in what is the first of a five-part series running throughout the month of June, every Tuesday, exploring young workers' rights on the job. We are the Ryerson Young Workers' Rights Hub. We are based in the Faculty of Arts at Ryerson, and the goal of the hub is to advance young workers' understanding of their rights on the job and how to exercise them. We begin, as always, with an acknowledgement, but this time a somewhat different acknowledgement. Typically, this would identify our appreciation for being on the land of Indigenous peoples in this country. Recent days, however, have brought us horrific reminders of the devastating impact that colonialism has had on Indigenous children, families, and communities in this country. I'm referring, of course, to the discovery at the Kamloops, British Columbia Residential School of the unmarked remains of 215 children who attended that school. We know also that Kamloops was not an isolated case. Many deaths of children happened at residential schools across Canada. They went unreported, they went unacknowledged, and they certainly remained unaccounted for. We need to acknowledge the damage and wrongs that settler society has inflicted on Indigenous peoples. We need concrete action that matches our responsibility for evils that have been done in Canada's name. So I urge myself and I urge all of us to play a part in advancing justice for Indigenous nations and peoples. I'd like to suggest that we begin with a moment of silence to honor the memory of those 215 young Indigenous lives lost in Kamloops, and what we owe them and what we owe their peoples. So if you're able to and comfortable, I would suggest that we stand for this occasion and reflect on what has been done in our name as Canadians. Thank you all for marking this moment. And now we move on to our topic for today and our speaker. These are tough times for young workers in Canada. They have the highest unemployment rate, and they can encounter a range of problems when they are working. Today's session provides a broad overview of the rights young workers should know they have on the job and how to exercise them. Our presenter is Nathalie Vengal. Nathalie is a national representative with the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. It's an organization better known by its acronym, UFCW. The UFCW is one of Canada's largest unions with over 250,000 members, and no union in Canada has a higher percentage of youth among its membership. Over 40% of UFCW members are under the age of 30. UFCW is in the forefront of promoting young workers' rights. Nathalie Vengal is a leader in the UFCW. Another issue that is dear to her heart is food security. Nathalie founded Canada's first youth-led food bank, and now she serves on the Toronto Food Policy Council, trying to influence Toronto municipal policy around hunger and food security. So we're about to learn a lot from Nathalie. Let me remind everyone, this session is being recorded. All participants, please do mute yourselves. And we are taking questions for Nathalie once her presentation is completed. And you can enter those questions that may come to your mind at any time through the chat function. So Nathalie, it's with great pleasure and appreciation that I welcome you to this event, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Meyer and Giselle, and everyone for organizing, Ryerson University for organizing this important event. Thank you everyone for attending and for the kind introduction, Meyer. So yes, as Meyer mentioned, I work for the United Food and Commercial Workers, which is a private sector union. The presentation today is going to touch upon topics about, the Employment Standards Act. We're going to be talking about COVID, the right to refuse unsafe work during COVID-19. We're going to be talking a little bit about human rights legislation, a little bit about cannabis use in the workplace, what the employers can and cannot do. And then we're going to move on to unionization and what has happened with young workers during the last since the beginning of the pandemic. Sorry. So we're going to be talking about that a lot. But as Mayor mentioned, if you have any questions at the end, any particular questions you have, specifically about legislation, specifically about unionization, or anything you have employment related, definitely super happy to answer those questions at my best capacity. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to share the presentation. So is everyone able to see my screen right now? Yes? Yes? It's all good? Perfect.
Yes.
So, fantastic. Love it. Everyone is able to hear me okay as well? Fantastic.
Yes, loud and clear.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So, so yes, this is just, the introductory picture doesn't hurt. It's always good to have it over there. This actually happened on a Labor Day, on Labor Parade. We always march, except last year because of the pandemic, but we're always there. Unions across the country gather together on Labor Day to celebrate their rights gain and the resilience and the continuous fight for stronger rights for workers across the country. This is the Labor Parade in Toronto. So what is UFCW Canada? Meyer did a fantastic introduction. In fact, so the United Food and Commercial Workers, or UFCW Canada, is a private sector union. So when we talk about unions in Canada, we need to understand that there are different unions for different industries and sectors. So you have the private sector, you have the construction industry, and you have the public sector. So public sector unions will be for workers in the public sector, like teachers or doctors or anyone working in the public sector, really. Then construction, specifically in the construction trades. And then we have the private sector. There are a variety of private sector unions as well. And Canada and UFCW Canada will fall under a private sector union. So we are an international union actually as well. We have over 250,000 workers. We represent over 250,000 workers here in Canada and over 1.3 in the United States. Just like Meyer mentioned, we represent workers, even though our name is United Food and Commercial Workers. We represent workers in a variety of workplace, not only dedicated to food and commerce. So we actually, 20% of our membership actually is in the private health sector. So nurses, PSWs, and even teachers in the private sector are among the many workers that we have the honor to represent. Other sectors such as hospitality, security guards, financial, manufacturing, and other industries are also part of UFCW Canada. So now moving on to provincial labor laws. For all workers in Canada, sorry, for all workers in Ontario, most of you, I'm assuming, are joining in from Ontario. But if you're not, or if you're planning on moving, remember, in Canada, each province has their own version of what we call the Employment Standards Act or provincial laws. Depending on where you work, depending on and specifically the workplace you work, this legislation may or may not apply to you. If you're an independent contractor, some of it might not apply to you. If you work for a bank, for example, then the federal employment legislation will apply to you instead of the provincial. So really, it all comes down as to where you're working, which industry you're working, and what type of work you're doing. But generally speaking, and broadly speaking, majority of workers in the province of Ontario will be protected under the Employment Standards Act. So as some of you may know, the Employment Standards Act is a legislation that protects the employee, protects and sets the minimum standards for employees in most workplaces in Ontario. So things such as minimum wages, hours of work, public leave, leave of absence, public holidays, vacation time and pay, among others, can be found. So remember, provincial labor legislations are minimum standards. It doesn't mean they cannot be strengthened or they cannot be improved through collective bargaining by union. These are the minimum sets of rights and privilege and obligations that employees and employers have in Ontario. Again, it doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that's the maximum. That's the minimum, and they can certainly be strengthened and improved as well. So if you have any questions about the Employment Standards Act, I encourage you all to definitely visit the Employment Standards Act website. About there currently, because of COVID and everything that had to do with the new changes, the emergency acts and the emergency provisions, the Employment Standards Acts have had some amendments for the current pandemic. So it's always good to continue checking out. Legislation is changing every day. Extensions to COVID-19 period has happened quite often in the past couple of months. So definitely check it out. I'm going to be talking about some of the newest extensions, the newest edits to these amendments, but definitely encourage you to look. Those are the essential rights that as a non-unionized worker, most employees have. So if you have any questions, hey, is the employer able to, how much am I entitled based on the ESA on overtime? Definitely check it out. Also keep in mind that you have to be non-union. If you're unionized, that's a different story. If you're unionized, you will have a collective bargaining agreement or union contract, which I will talk about later on. But if you're unionized, you will have a collective agreement that will probably have language as to what the rights for your workplace and the rights that have been negotiated by you, your co-workers, the union, and the employer over the course of the time being organized. Okay. So when we're talking about the employment standards as in COVID-19, as I mentioned, because of the Emergency Act, because of COVID-19, the pandemic, there have been quite a few amendments to what some of the rights that we had on the Employment Standards Act are, and the short-term modifications that have happened due to the pandemic. So important to know, the last extension of the COVID-19 period or the pandemic emergency period, whatchamacallit, it was extended the last until July 3rd, 2021. As of today, it looks like it's still the COVID-19 period it's still considered, it hasn't been another extension. So as of today, there hasn't been any other amendments. So technically, until July the 3rd, we're still in what we call, the government will understand as COVID-19 period. So during the COVID-19 period, a non-unionized employee whose employer has temporarily reduced or temporarily eliminated the hours of work for reasons related to COVID-19 is deemed to be on job protected infectious disease emergency. Okay. There was a lot of confusion because a lot of people are like, well, I'm laid off because of COVID-19. In the eyes of the government, that was changed and amended so many times. In the eyes of the government, you're not considered to be laid off or constructively dismissed if your employer reduced or eliminated the hours or wages for reasons related to COVID-19 for the government, you are deemed to be on a job protected infections disease emergency leave. At the very beginning of the pandemic, it was like, oh, you're laid off because of COVID-19. But now, I don't know. I sometimes think they just want to overly confuse us. To be honest, that's just my honest impression of it. Just people get confused with a lot of information. That's it. So just keep that in mind. After July the 3rd, so on July the 4th, 2021, um, the conditions about being laid off or constructively dismissed will go back to where they were as per the Employment Standards Act prior to the pandemic, and the workers will not be deemed to be on job protected infectious disease emergency leave. So there are many possibilities that could happen. So maybe the employer will officially lay off, or will instead of the employees who are right now on a leave, on a job protected leave, may be deemed to be laid off as according to the Employment Standards Act, or constructively dismissed, depending on the case. They might extend it, or change the title of that emergency leave. That could happen. Or you might be recalled to go back. If you are on a job protected infectious disease leave right now, and you are in a position where, well, they haven't called you back to work, there might be there's an opportunity for you to call the employer and say, well, so what's up? What's the deal? What's the deal? Am I gonna be called back, or am I now considered laid off, or am I what's up? I would encourage you to do that just for further clarity, because that would also affect how you might use EI in the future and so on. Right? Further clarification. We want to be sure that we have a good understanding of what the employment relationship is. That's my advice. Then right now, because if you're deemed on an infectious on an infectious emergency leave, um, the Employment Standards Act unpaid job protected leave for employers who are not performing the duties of their position, because so in order to also be considered on an emergency leave, there are some conditions, right? So you're either under a medical investigation or supervision or treatment for COVID-19. B, acting in accordance with an order under the Health Protection and Promotion Act, or you are in isolation, or you're quarantined, or acting in accordance with public health information or direction. You're also directed by the employer. Maybe if there was a COVID-19 outbreak at your workplace, you were directed by the employer not to work due to a concern that the employee could have spread COVID-19 in the workplace. That could also come not only by the employer, but also by the government. Providing care or support to a specified individual for reasons related to COVID-19, such as school or childcare, or an employee does not send their child to school because of reasons of COVID-19. That might be another reason why you might be deemed on infections emergency leave. And also because you're prevented from returning to Ontario because of travel restrictions. So these are some of the conditions to be considered on leave, or to be, or why you might be asked to go on an emergency leave, infectious emergency leave. Okay. Another important question that a lot of workers have raised to us as a union, workers who are, who work at the beginning now and continue to be concerned about their health and safety and the risk of being exposed to COVID-19 at work, is the right to refuse unsafe work. How does that work? How do I exercise as a worker my right to say, no, this is kind of dangerous, I don't want to do this? So this is how it works. This is the legislation and the steps that you can take to refuse unsafe work. Okay. First of all, it is very important to clarify that the right of refusal applies to workplaces where workers suspect they will be exposed to COVID-19. But this suspicion, it has to be based on the specific facts at their workplace and the specific situation there. So, for example, if I work at a retail store and my good friend works at another retail store, and my good friend calls me and says, hey, Natalie, like, we work for the same employer, different location, but, there was a COVID outbreak. There might be, definitely because of, the amount of clients and so on, there might be a break at your store as well. I cannot use that as an excuse. It has to be based on the specific situation at my retail store, even if it's a similar situation, or it has to be specific to the workplace. All right. It is also very important to know that the right to refuse unsafe work applies to all workers in Canada, regardless of the kind of job they perform or the type of work they do. So even if they're part-time, full-time, casual workers, out of status, uh, um, independent, the right to refuse unsafe work applies to all workers in Canada. A lot of workers sometimes feel like they don't want to be, they don't want to get the employer upset, or workers who are at precarious working situations feel a little, they don't want to upset the employer, but really it's our health that is at the front lines, especially workers who are in the front lines right now. We're dealing with difficult situations, and your health and safety can never be jeopardized for any fears. So definitely encourage everyone around you, regardless of anything. Every worker in Canada, every worker in Ontario has the right to refuse unsafe work. Full stop. Full stop. So now, going back, if you suspect or you are concerned of being exposed to COVID-19 in the workplace and you wish to refuse work, these are the following steps. Okay. Step one, the first thing you need to do, advise your supervisor or employer that the work is unsafe and that you're refusing to do it. You have a reason to believe that there is a COVID-19, or there might be an exposure, or there's any health and safety related reason to refuse that you think that will put you in danger and your coworkers in danger. Please advise your supervisor or employer or immediate employer. If there's a health and safety representative of the workplace, please consider advising them as well. All right. Some workplaces, depending on depending on the amount of employees there are at a workplace, by law, they have to have a health and safety representative, or various representatives, depending on the amount. This, if you have a union, you can contact the health and safety representative chosen by the union, so elected by the colleagues and members of the union, or you can also call your union representative if you are in a unionized setting. Okay. Step number two. So after you advise your supervisor, keep in mind that your employer, no matter what, has the obligation to investigate the issue ASAP. And by ASAP is like ASAP, promptly. Health and safety is nothing that you can wait and just like chill about, okay? You have the right to be present during the investigation or wait in a safe space in the workplace while your employer conducts the investigation. So you can choose. You can either be with the employer or not, or just wait while the employer conducts the investigation. That is your right. Step number three, if the employer determines that there is a health and safety issue, the employer by law is required to discuss the potential solutions with the employer and make them. So, if it's providing additional PPE, if it's working from home, if it's changing workstations, they can discuss it with you. You also have the right to say, hey, I have an idea, I can solve this, how to solve this. Definitely you have the right to say and propose ideas to the employer, but if there's determined that there is a health and safety issue, the employer has to discuss the potential solution and apply it by law. Okay. But then if the employer determined that there is a health and safety issue, which is sometimes quite common that happens, especially now in COVID-19, there has been a lot of outbreaks, and employers, in many workplaces with outbreaks, and many at the very beginning of the pandemic, there were a lot of on health and safety practices filed at the Ministry of Labor, and they didn't go anywhere, unfortunately. So now, maybe if you're in a situation where the employer determined that there is a health and safety situation, you have the legal right to call the Ministry of Labor and request a formal inspection of the workplace. An inspector from the Ministry of Labor will visit the workplace and conduct the investigation. Again, just like in step two, you have the right to be present or not. If it's determined that there is a health and safety issue, then the inspector has the authority and the authority to order the employer to make all the necessary adjustments to ensure the workplace is safe, including shutting down if necessary. I'm not sure if some of you follow the news, but a lot of workplaces have been actually shut down more now than before because of the third wave, um, because of the COVID-19 outbreak. So the government is the new measures are stricter when it comes to workplace outbreaks as opposed to before. And the government may ask the employer to shut down the plant until it is fully sanitized and ensure that the outbreak doesn't is not further. All right, so keep in mind that again, health and safety, your health and safety is a priority always. As workers, we have the right to have a healthy and safety place to work at. Don't feel like if you're in a situation, listen, I've got calls from workers saying I haven't had, at work, my employer is not sanitizing enough. We don't have enough social distance. There was a COVID-19 outbreak and many people got COVID-19, but the employer didn't shut down. The amount of calls that we've had with workers concerned that the employer did not take any measures to prevent and to ensure that the workplace was safe is unreal, unreal. So please do not feel that you're doing something that the employer might be upset because these are your rights. This is legislation. These are your rights. All right. Also, I wanted to touch upon human rights in Ontario, a little bit upon human rights. There are a lot of issues regarding human rights when it comes to workplace rights. Sometimes, or not as often, sometimes we dismiss some, how the employers may discriminate us, and we might not associate with a violation of our rights, of our human rights. So I just thought it would be also important to sort of explain how the human rights system works in Ontario, and sort of give a background of what are some of the grounds for discrimination in Ontario. So essentially, the Ontario human rights system consists of three separate independent parts. So the first one is the OHRC, or the Ontario Human Rights Commission. And it's the purpose of the OHRC is to develop policies and provide targeted public education to monitor human rights. It does research and analysis and conduct human rights inquiries. Okay. The second will be the Legal Support Center, or the Human Rights Legal Support Center, which helps people who files applications with the tribunal, with the Human Rights Tribunal, the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal. And the services may include advice, support, and legal representation. So then the third one is the tribunal, the Human Rights Tribunal of Ontario. And essentially, this tribunal decides if someone's human rights have been violated. So they determine the grounds, if the grounds of discrimination actually happened. And if people think their rights have been, under the codes, have been violated, individuals can file an application directly with the tribunal, and then the tribunal, depending on the case and depending on the grounds and depending on the specific case, will decide the best way to deal with the situation. Whether, first of all, it will also decide whether the rights were violated or not, and how to proceed with the case. All right. So it is important to know, like, if there's an issue of human rights, who do we call first? And how do we how do we know if we might even have a case, right? So definitely saying going to my advice would be to go to the Legal Support Center first. Say, listen, this is my case. How do I file an application? Do you think I have a case? And then I'll definitely go to the tribunal afterwards. I will definitely give the Human Rights Legal Support Center a call, or email them and see, to see if there's grounds, and you can get further help on how to file an application if your rights were violated at work or elsewhere. And then most likely they will direct you to the tribunal to file the full application. So when it comes to human rights, the Ontario Human Rights Code is a provincial law that gives everybody equal rights and opportunities without discrimination in a specific area, such as job, housing, services, facilities, and contracts or agreements. When it comes to work-related, workers who are unionized usually count on the representation and and legal and the legal representation that the union provides to the workers. But workers who are not unionized sometimes are at a place where some of them know that they have been violated, or some of them feel, and some of them believe that they are their rights, the human rights are being violated, but don't know where to seek, and don't know where to start, don't know where to figure it out where the violation took place. So the important thing about to remember is that the Ontario Human Rights Code applies not only at jobs and related pertaining job and employment, when it comes to housing, services, facilities, day-to-day interactions, really. We have to be mindful about the Ontario Human Rights Code at all times, and especially when we're dealing with different institutions. All right. The code prohibits actions that discriminate against people based on a list of protected grounds in a protected social area. So the grounds are age, ancestry, color, race, citizenship, ethnic origin, place of origin, creed, disability, family status, including single status, gender identity, gender expression, receipt of public assistance if you're in housing, if you're receiving housing assistance, record of offenses. In this specifically applies to employment. Sometimes workers are in place where they feel discriminated because they have a minor criminal record and they cannot find employment because of that, because the employer won't simply hire because of that. Other grounds include sex, including pregnancy and breastfeeding, and sexual orientation. So it is very important to remember that each specific ground needs to be explored individually and based on our situation. Also, I would encourage you to visit and really look up all the cases and all. It might take a little bit of time to read and everything, but it's really interesting how sometimes there are microaggressions that are really discrimination, or are or when you're interacting maybe with an employer. I've personally have to listen to stories from workers who have been misgendered at work on purpose. Like on many occasions, they have been misgendered by the employer. That is human rights. That's a violation of the human rights, especially when they have been very specific and they've clarified, and they have asked the employer to what their gender identity is. So it should have never been an issue, yet the employer continually misgender the worker. Why is that an issue? Well, that is a human rights. It's making a mistake like that. It's against your human rights. Okay, so it's very important for us to know these rights and look at what each ground is, and look at our position and determine if there has ever been a violation of our human rights at the workplace. Cannabis and alcohol testing at the workplace. So this is something, when cannabis officially became legal in Canada, there were a lot of questions when it came to cannabis legislation at the workplace and testing, cannabis and alcohol testing at the workplace. How legal was it? So the legislation might be a little lengthy, but in short, what you need to know is that drug and alcohol testing is only permissible for roles that are safety sensitive with limited supervision, and where the employer can prove that impairment is a safety risk, and that not being impaired is a bona fide occupational requirement under the law. So policies that focus on purposes other than safety, like productivity, for example, would be difficult to justify it as bona fide requirement. So essentially what you need to keep in mind when it comes to alcohol testing and cannabis testing is this is a health and safety requirement. Like if they are only testing because it will actually be deemed unhealthy, and it will deem that the health and safety of the workplace will be jeopardized, or the health and safety of the workers will be jeopardized. And that if that's not the case, it will be very hard for the employer to test or to ask for that test and justify that testing. So you'll legitimately have the right to say, what's the reason for the testing? You have the right to say, why are you testing me for? And they have, in their justification, they have to provide you a good reason. For example, well, you're required to work. You're required to drive for work. and you're required, if you're working in transportation or delivery, in delivery services, well, you are required to work. That is health and safety. That is a bona fide occupational health, occupational requirement for the job. So that will be a justification that would be fully justified. But if they don't have a fully justified reason, you always remember, have the right to say, why are you testing me for? Why am I getting this tested for? And it has to be in the whole conversation, because employers can be very lengthy when it comes to explaining things and can be confusing, just like legislation sometimes. You can say, well, it has to resonate health and safety. And why is health and safety, right? You have the right to ask that question. Again, the employer must be able to show, according to the existing standards, that there is an inherent risk in the workplace or that severe consequences may occur as a result of being impaired. That's exactly what you're looking for. Already? So now moving forward, I'm going to be talking about unions, and I promise after that, it's all questions. We can have a really chill conversation, one-on-one. I'll be fast, I promise. Okay. So what's a union? So a lot of people are like, yo, what's a union? Like the actual conversation about union is like, what they think of union as a third party. Like, yo, what's a union? Like, oh, union business. Like they all think about unions in the funniest ways. Like I'm like, do I look like a union? Do I really look like a union? Like, I don't know what a union looks like, like, and then I'm like, and they're like, no, it takes some people a while to truly understand that the union is a group of workers who come together to make decisions about the conditions of the work. The union is the workers. The union is the unionization, the togetherness of workers coming together to make decisions about their working conditions. Okay, so through union memberships in Canada, through union membership, workers can secure their working conditions. They have the legal right to negotiate better wages, working hours, benefits, pension plans, workplace health and safety practices, and pretty much any work-related issues. In Canada, all workers of all working ages have the right to a union. Now, having said that, the only exception I will make to this will be that depending on the province where you work, some agricultural workers, those that if it wasn't for them, we wouldn't be able to put food on our table. Legit, we know that. Agricultural workers, even if they're Canadian born, do not have the right to join a union in some provinces, Ontario being one of them. In Quebec, in Alberta, Manitoba, they do have the right to join a union, in BC as well. In Ontario, it's not. But that's a conversation we're going to have another day. I promise we're going to have a conversation because it's a lengthy but very important conversation to have. Okay. The process of joining a union is confidential by law. All right. Something else that is very important to say is that the pandemic, young workers are, as Meyer said, 40, like our membership, 40% of our membership are young workers. And because of the pandemic, as you see in this Toronto Star's news and article, the pandemic surprisingly had a rebound for unions. Like participation, like the participation now is higher than it has been in the last 15 years. Now I can only speak about UFCW. I can only speak about the increase of number of membership that an increase of members that join UFCW. Thousands, and I'm literally saying thousands of workers joined UFCW all across Canada last year. And I am so excited to say that most of them were young workers. I was super excited to have had the honor to assist young workers in the process of organizing here in Ontario. It was amazing how young workers took such a leadership role the entire pandemic and said, you know what, no more. Why am I jeopardizing my life? It was moving, it was inspirational, it was courageous to see in young and to also learn that young workers more than ever, when it comes at this pandemic, we've been, with student debt, the house crisis, everything that, the young workers that we have to go through every day, and now job precarity, and now having to deal with an employer who doesn't care about our health. No, no, that's not happening. So super, super excited to learn that young workers actually took a great step all across Canada in various industries, and said, you know what? I'm sorry, so sorry. We need a union. We're not going to take this anymore. The main reason, obviously, was health and safety, but there were all the other reasons. Other reasons where my employer is harassing me. My employer does not respect my rights. My employer honestly doesn't care about my health and safety. I don't know what my job security will look like. Employers being, very caring about the legislation that was out there, the pandemic prescriptions for the workplaces, the employer not paying workers what they were supposed to be getting. So there were many reasons, but the main reasons absolutely was health and safety being a main reason for the workers joining the union. And I would say the second one, and I think the second most important, was they wanted to secure their jobs. They wanted to secure their jobs, right? So, so why do workers organize? So why do workers have the real courage to call a union or to just be like, I want to organize a union? So the first reason is, as individuals, being in a union, we all have different reasons why we want to be in a union. We all have particular individual reasons why we want to organize. And it also, being part of a union also gives has some social reasons as well, like being part of a group. A lot of us spend a lot of time working every day. Most of our time, most of us, we work more time than we're at home. So that sense of isolation at work, it's not something cool at all. Having the sense of togetherness from your co-workers when it comes to working conditions, it's a great motivation when all the co-workers are together and saying, you know what, we need change at work. It might be one of the reasons. Economic, of course. One of the main reasons why workers join unions is because, unionized workers make on average 30% more than non-unionized workers. The ability to legally negotiate your working conditions is extremely powerful, because at that point, you just don't have to, settle with what the employer offers. You have the right to sit at the table and say, let's sit down and talk about fair working conditions, fair uh, fair wages, fair treatment. That, so you're in a position of being part of the table, not being told what you're given or settled to what you've been given. So it's a powerful economic motivation that you have. The management, listen, the amount of calls that we get, like, my management is calling me names, issues regarding sexual harassment on behalf of management, management discrimination, favoritism, workers being treated unfairly and rude. That's a major motivating factor. And now the last that I have an interrogation saying that is it political? Do workers union because it's political? I think I'm biased in the answer. To be honest, I might be a little biased. I think that, we know how legislation changes every day. Politics are vital when it comes to legislation. Politics is the Politicians and politics determine the rights that we have today and that might not be there tomorrow. You know, and having a union, when you have a union, when you negotiate your working conditions, even if those political changes happen, even if those political changes happen in rights, which happen all the time, you can secure that. That is a position. That is a political position. That is a powerful position that you can take as a group. So yeah, so these are some of the reasons why workers organize in general. If you can think of many other reasons, feel free to add them into the chat. Some of the advantages of being in a union is, unions provide a work-life balance. A union means job security, as we also said before. Unions negotiate higher wages. Once you unionize, you can negotiate language to secure your seniority rights at the workplace. Seniority means the longer you work at a workplace, the length of employment that you have at a workplace. unions negotiate fair benefits, unions negotiate improve overtime pay. We know how in Ontario that was changed not so long ago when the new government came in. Overtime pay used to be paid on a weekly basis, on depending on the hours of work, at a weekly basis, and now it is on a monthly basis. So this again, talking about the politics and how our legislation changes and our rights can be taken or modified, taken away or modified. It's really important to know that you can secure what you have. You can secure your working conditions. You can protect and negotiate improved working conditions and rights on top of what the legislation already entails for you and your coworkers. Also, unions have a little bit of a domino effect when it comes to non-unionized workplaces. So unions raise the standards. So when workers at non-unionized locations find out that other locations, maybe from the same employer, are paying higher wages, have better benefits, have better negotiated paid sick days, and so on, that is a motivation. So that motivates the workers to be like, well, why am I not getting that myself? And we're doing the same kind of job. So there's a bit of a domino effect in the economy, or like the invisible hand in the economy, but in the positive way, of course, where the standards when unionized jobs have higher wages and higher standards, the industry standards also raise, in one way or another. So when workers, one of the main powerful aspect of unionization is the negotiation of a union contract or a collective agreement. So workers who are unionized have a union contract, who are legally binding contracts negotiated by the workers, the union, because we've established that the union is workers together, and that both the employer and employees have to abide by. What is included in union contract is union language that protects working conditions, job titles, seniority, hours, wage chart, benefits, pension plan, and anything work related. So what is the difference between non-unionized contracts and unionized contracts is that, if the unionized contracts are legally enforceable and the employer doesn't give it to you, does not abide by what the contract has, workers have the legal right to file a grievance against the employer. A grievance is just a term that we use in the labor movement to refer to a legal complaint against the employer. So if your collective agreement has a number of rights and entitlements that you have, and the employer does not abide by it does not give them to you, you can legally file a complaint to the Ministry of Labor against the employer, and the employer has to sit down and settle the grievance. As opposed to, we know that some employees get away with things. They don't have, when non-unionized workplaces, a lot of these things go undone. Let's just call it that for a simpler way of saying it. So, unionization, the last part of my presentation is what are the labor movement successes sometimes, when it comes to successes and what the labor movement has obtained, sometimes goes unnoticed, but, weekends off, health and safety standard, parental and maternity leave, ending child labor, better protections during COVID-19, improved the minimum wage, and a variety of social causes are part of the labor movement successes, and the community together, and various members of the community and stakeholders who work tirelessly to ensure that workers have higher standards at work that will positively have an impact not only in their families, and their colleagues, but also in society. So raising standards for all workers is a labor movement success that we all share. So this is the end of my presentation. Now I'm super happy to take any questions you have, or any questions you may have about your specific conditions. You don't have to say where you work or anything. You can just give me examples and see if I can hopefully answer the question. Also, well, before I finish the presentation, feel free to send me an email. This is my email address. You can also add me on Twitter, follow me on Twitter. I'll follow you back for sure. And if you have any questions that you don't feel comfortable asking here, send me an email, shoot me an email, and I'll definitely get back to you ASAP. Thank you so much.
Nathalie, thank you so much for that really rich, wide-ranging presentation. I think we all now have a much better sense of the legal and policy landscape that regulates the way we work, the way we should be treated at work. So we're now into the Q&A period, and I'm going to turn that part of this session over to Giselle Gerardo, who is with the Young Workers' Rights Hub. And I know have a little bit of flexibility from Nathalie's part on time, so we can go into a bit of overtime. We won't go too long, but we want to make sure that we give the questions you've asked a fair shot at being answered by Nathalie. So Giselle, over to you.
Thank you, Meyer. Thank you, Nathalie, for your very informative presentation. I definitely learned a lot, and of course, there's so much more to learn about workers' rights. Today, I will be moderating today's Q&A session. As a friendly reminder, if you have any questions for Nathalie during today's session, please don't hesitate to send them to me through the chat. As young workers, it's often not discussed what our rights are in our workplaces, and we are unsure of where to find the information to support our individual experiences. I think we can also all agree that the COVID-19 pandemic has changed the way we work and our workers' rights as well. Our first question here today is, are there any avenues that exist for marginalized or precarious workers to go through if they are reprimanded for speaking out on workplace conditions? Or what advice do you have for workers who fear reprisal?
Fear of reprisal, it's extremely common. You know, depending on where we come, the path of lives that we come from, racialized workers, our individual stories take us to different places where, you know, we fear our job security, but we fear what's going to happen with the employer. But we also have to keep in mind that there's legislation that are there to protect ourselves. But if there are specific issues at a workplace, but you think there's a lot of unfairness going on, discrimination going on, where your workers are not being, what your rights as a workers are not being respected, absolutely call a labor union. You can also call the Ministry of Labor. If you don't want to call union is an avenue. As young workers, we always encourage you, you know, to the power of social media to talk about, to reach through social media to the Ontario Federation of Labor or the Canadian Labor Congress, to your local labor council, to the Ministry of Labor, the Labor Board, but the union to see. Sometimes unionization might not be the venue, but maybe a union can direct you into what can be done through other legislation. But absolutely, I will definitely encourage you to give us a call and see how we can assist. If it's not unionization, we can perhaps advise you who will be the best person, or who will be the best, or which will be the best institution to assist the workers in this specific case.
Thank you for that. Kind of like a follow-up question to that one. Which avenue would I take to enact change if my workplace conditions are being compromised by the lack of government action, such as lack of paid sick leave as an essential worker?
Well, I would definitely recommend that you give us a call. I think my answer is a bit biased, but I would definitely recommend that you give us a call, because, you know, action, you know, as workers, we have a lot of power when we come together and we demand things together as a group. You know, individually, sometimes we do things and we know that sometimes that doesn't get anywhere, or maybe benefits some and not everyone else who might be potentially impacted. So definitely give us a call. Definitely give us a call. And again, if we cannot assist you, or we think that maybe we don't have the best course of action for the specifics of your workplaces and enforcing certain legislations or so on, we will definitely help you out, direct you into the best organization. You know, it can be called legal aid. It can be called different organizations out there that have different roles that could also be as helpful.
Thank you, Nathalie. Our next question here is, some students are asking, that they're interested in getting into activism and or advocating for workers' rights as a career. How does one start for that one? Oh, Nathalie.
Sorry, there you go. That's super, super important. I was actually talking to Meyer about that not so long ago. We were discussing how, you know, how young workers can become activists in their communities and what are the steps to take. So, and you know, without being too UFCW, but I was just gonna say that we have a really awesome program called the Young Workers Internship Program, where members from across the country and they sort of embark in a 5-week course where they learn a lot about activism. You know, we talk about globalization, we talk about a variety of issues that impact young workers, and hopefully they will turn into activists not only at the workplace but in their communities. But one of the venues that, you know, I personally took the route was I started going to organizations that appeal, and that is more on a personal level, of course, that appeal to the rights that I was interested in. You can call it, you know, I have a, you know, I couldn't pick, you know, I just wanted to be in absolutely every organization, but, you know, the rights that I was mostly interested in or thought that needed more advocacy or you know, at the moment. So if it's, you know, if you're interested in climate action, if you're interested in taking activism to support members of the 2S LGBT community or food insecurity, perhaps, going into, there are a number of organizations, if it's labor, talking to labor unions or labor councils, and there are a variety of organizations that are super, super interested in volunteers and maybe have the possibility of future possibility of jobs, or just starting to learn about these organizations and see if there is a possibility of you doing different sort of actions for the organization. I think that starting to see what kind of interest you have, what's rights, what activism are you interested in, has a lot of potential. The first thing I would say is start legitimately looking up organizations that you think you will be super helpful and that require advocacy. There's a lot of activism. Canada, we need all this progressive energy in every aspect of our society, So listen, just start calling. You would be so surprised on the amount of welcomeness from all these organizations that are looking for young activists like all of you to participate, because a lot, people are moved. I think the only good thing about globalization, in all fairness, is that it's getting people together all over the world. All the protests that is going all over the world for social justice, people getting together all over the world. One of the good things about globalization, one of the only things is that, and I think that is so powerful. We're ready. People all over the world are taking stand against injustice. We can do it at home and we can do it in multitudes. So definitely start looking up, because there's plenty of places to do that. And yeah, career-wise, listen, I think that's the beginning of it. That's how I started. I started volunteering for a center for Spanish-speaking people here in Toronto. They had an anti-homophobia project. I started volunteering there. And from there on, I started embarking. I opened the food bank and I started volunteering with the union at the time. So, I was doing a bunch of things as a student. I was in university at the time. So that's how I started the career in activism. So I think that the start is to knock on that door.
Thank you, Nathalie. I've seen that there's a lot of passionate students, especially at Ryerson. So I can't wait to see them in your place next time that we host these webinars.
Yes.
So we have a couple of questions left. From your experience, do youth know their rights at work? And if not, what could we do to spread awareness?
So my experience is, when I go to universities, most folks do know, most young folks do know or are somewhat very aware of their rights. High schools, I'm really surprised these days, as opposed to a couple years ago where most young students didn't know their rights, especially when they were, doing their placements and so on, they weren't as aware. But these days, I'm like, okay, why am I doing this? You know it all. Like a lot of young workers, I don't know if it's the pandemic as well, because people are very aware, they're reading more and so on about what's going on in legislation, that it's sort of inspiring them to read legislation when it comes to workplace. Now, it's a different story when I go to community centers and promote Know Your Rights, or I deliver Know Your Rights legislation, because a lot of young non-for-profit organizations and community centers assist new Canadians and newcomers to Canada, and some of them do not know all the rights. That's what I feel the impact and the information is very necessary as well. Because of, I have the privilege to know Spanish, so that also facilitates when it comes to, translation for folks who are in the process of learning English, or, who feel at ease learning things in Spanish. And also, having the opportunity to talk to them about their rights, it's extremely powerful. So I think that, maybe talking about rights at the workplace, encouraging people to really look at the Employment Standards Act and be like, really, is this all we have? Legitimately, like, look at the Employment Standards Act, talk about human rights at work. When how to promote Know Your Rights at work is legitimately talking about, well, I wouldn't say memorizing, because that's too much, but I would say knowing the essentials of the Employment Standards Act, like your wages, hours at work, what's discrimination, what's health and safety. So a little bit of what we talked about today, knowing the essentials of work and sort of promoting it everywhere you can. Every time I go to a Tim Hortons or a place, and let's say if it's a holiday, I'm like, you should be getting 1.5, legitimately. So every time you have a chance to talk to a worker, tell them, oh, today's a holiday. You should be getting 1.5. I know I sound extra, but I don't care. I don't care. As a worker, as an advocate, we want to always advocate and ensure that all workers know what their rights are at work, right? So I think that's a good way to start advocating about their rights at work.
Thank you, Nathalie. Our next question is there an alternative to unionization when seeking change in the workplace?
That is a very good question. Listen, yes, I do believe that if unionization legally is not an option, or it's not something that it's the best venue, or workers aren't prepared for that, togetherness at the end of the day is a good alternative. Knowing who to call when things get difficult is a good alternative. So if there is a violation of health and safety standards, or you're not being paid, or there is wage theft at the workplace, you weren't being paid, knowing to call immediately the Ministry of Labor, or calling a legal aid assistance and know exactly how to proceed is powerful. An employment legal aid clinic, calling them directly, I think is powerful. If there is human rights, if you think there is grounds for human rights violations of the workplace, that you can investigate and call the Human Rights Tribunal or the Legal Help Center. I think that's very powerful. Knowing exactly when systemic issues are happening and addressing them immediately is important. And more importantly, is doing it with a group of workers. The more, the merrier. The togetherness, doing it together, even if it's not through unionization, is important. Speaking out and saying, well, this is not good. How do we address this? Okay, let's call the Ministry of Labor. Let's call, being proactive when it comes to issues at work is extremely important.
Thank you, Nathalie. Then I have one last question. Mm-hmm. As we close off today's event, what is one thing young workers should know?
What things workers should know? That you can organize. I'm kidding. You can definitely organize. This is the time to organize. That young workers should know that there are a lot of organizations, progressive organizations, that are advocating on young workers' behalf and on young workers' matters. You're not alone. We are, as unions in the labor movement, and a variety of organizations are advocating for canceling student debt. We're advocating to address the issues of the housing the prices and the housing prices. And here in Toronto, it is crazy. I don't know if you've seen Block Toronto, but like every time I see Block Toronto, which is the not entertaining news, but you know, easy to read on Facebook kind of thing. The housings that are selling for $1 million are like a washroom. I'm not even kidding. So listen, we're advocating on that. Don't get me wrong. And there are a lot of, as young workers, you're not alone. You have allies in the community. You can reach out to many allies who are advocating at every level, municipal, political, municipal, federal, and provincial, and in every way we can to ensure that young workers have a better working future. So I think that we should know that, because sometimes as young workers, we feel very isolated when it comes to the multi-layered issues that happen in our country. And no, you all, don't worry, we got your back. We got your back.
Nathalie, thank you so much for this terrific launch to our 5-part series of Know Your Rights for young workers. You've given us such a comprehensive sense of some of the laws, some of the policies that exist, and how to go about exercising them and trying to capitalize on them. And, you know, I especially appreciated your comment about you're not alone. You know, I think in so many aspects of our lives, when we run into challenges and adversities, we're probably not the only person who has run into that roadblock and has had that experience. And together in some format or other, and by communicating what the issues are, improvement and change can come. And so I'm going to remind everyone that Nathalie has put it out there. If there are any particular personal issues you want more information on, you can get in touch with Nathalie, and she provided her contact points earlier. One organization I know that Nathalie would also encourage you to know about is the Workers' Action Center. There is in Toronto a Workers' Action Center, which in many ways is kind of a first stop community-based attempt to assist workers with difficulties and challenges they have found. And best of all, Nathalie's coming back. She'll be with us again the last Tuesday in March to wrap up our series, talking more about issues around unionization. So on June 29th, Nathalie will be leading a discussion of can joining a union help young workers? And I really liked that last question about what about alternatives to unionization? And I'm sure that will come up again in more detail. But that last session is an opportunity to find out more about how do unions function as organizations, what kinds of things appear in collective agreements and contracts that they sign, and generally what role do unions play, and what record do they have trying to support young workers. So all of that goes into our last session. And I'll just do a quick plug for next week's session, which is on ending discrimination and harassment at work. And our prime presenter there will be the Director of Human Rights for the Ontario Federation of Labour, Ogo Ikalo, and her colleagues, who through the Ontario Federation of Labour represent close to 2 million workers in Ontario. So join us for that session. You can register online at our website. And in closing, a big shout out to 2 people who did a lot to make today's session happen. One you've already seen and heard from, and that is Giselle Gerardo. Giselle, who hosted today and did a lot of other things to get this going. I thank you, and to Derek Reynolds in the Ryerson Faculty of Arts, whose work you're looking at. These visuals were done by Derek. And so I thank each and every one of you who joined us today. If you have any questions about the hub or any suggestions for things we should be doing, please let us know through our website. And have a great week, everyone. And we'll see you again next Tuesday, 4 o'clock. Nathalie, thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you so much, Giselle. You were fantastic. Thank you so much, Derek. Thank you so much, everyone. It was fantastic.
Bye.